welcome back to the Medical Projects YouTube channel. If you are new around here, my name is Olivia and I am a second year medical student at King's College London, and here at Medical Projects we've created this YouTube channel which is dedicated to giving you all of our top tips and bits of advice to help you succeed in your medical school application, and we're also here to give you a better insight into what medical school is actually like. So for today's video we are going to be talking a bit more about interviews. Medical school interview season is fast approaching and it's going to be looking a little bit different this year because of coronavirus, as we all know, and I'm going to be touching on that in a future video. But for today's video, I thought we'd touch upon the 5 things that you should definitely avoid doing in your interview, and then I'll follow that up with 5 things that will look really good in your interview. Before we start, if you haven't already, please do make sure you have subscribed to our YouTube channel and click the notification bell so that you can be notified as and when we post. We post every single week, so we're always creating content for you guys. And of course, if you have anything else that you'd like to see from us or for us to film, leave a comment down below and we'll make sure to do that for you. So medical school interviews, they are a tricky one. They are very nerve-wracking. Anyone who says they weren't nervous during their interview is lying. They are really tough, but by the time you've got to your interview, you are so close to getting that coveted spot at medical school that now is not the time to scupper your chances. So I'm hoping that some of the things I talk about today will really help you out in your upcoming interviews. So let's start with the negatives and get those out of the way with first, and then I'll talk about things that you can do to improve your interview. The first thing I've said you should avoid is sounding too rehearsed. Now, of course, it goes without saying, practice is so important when it comes to interviews. It's really important to practice the types of questions that you can expect to encounter on the day, but likewise, you don't want to sound too rehearsed. So for example, if someone asks you, why medicine, why not nursing? It's important to think of the reasons you're going into medicine beforehand so that when you come to the interview you have a bit of an idea about what you're talking about. But you don't want to sound too rehearsed and make it sound a bit robotic because it loses its flow, and a lot of the time I think if you sound like that, they'll throw in a trick question or they'll put something in there to throw you off because they know that you've rehearsed this so much. So you want to sound as natural as possible. Think of it almost like a professional conversation. The next thing I think you should avoid is going into things in too much detail when it's not necessary. So what I mean by this is you want to avoid being overly descriptive about things like your work experience. So it's much more important to talk about what you've learned from your work experience rather than sit there in front of the interviewer and say, I watched this amazing laparoscopic surgery, I saw a coronary heart bypass, and the nurse did this and the doctor did this, and then, you know, they took this vein and they grafted it onto this artery. Instead, you want to say, you know, very succinctly, I watched this surgery and I noticed that the doctor showed this quality and the nurses showed this quality and there was loads of teamwork going on, and that's something I've shown myself. Reflect more than you describe. The next thing I've said to avoid doing is giving generic answers / dissing nurses. So this sounds like an obvious one, but you know, they're often going to say to you, why medicine? Why not nursing? And it can be very tempting to say, I want to help people, which they will soon follow up with, but nurses help people, accountants help people, how is being a doctor different? So don't fall into this trap of being too generic. Give really explicit, thought out answers, and don't just say, you know, well, I want to help people, I want to be a leader, because, you know, a lot of jobs cover that and they want to know why medicine specifically. Likewise, make sure you acknowledge the importance of other healthcare roles in the hospital. Don't say something like, I don't want to be a nurse because they don't get to diagnose. Because many nurses, for example, run their own clinics in primary care, so it's a bit of a throwaway statement. The next tip I've said is try not to second guess yourself. Now, this is something I did in one of my interviews and I think it didn't come off very well. They might, for example, give you a medical ethics question and say, who do you think should get the organ out of these 3 eligible patients? And, you know, you might think it through and think, you know, the 3-year-old child. And they're not just going to say, okay, great, yeah, I like your reasoning. They'll say, but what about this patient? What about this patient? They've been waiting 20 years. Are you really going to deprive them of that organ? Do you think that's fair? Are you sure? And they're doing that to test your resilience and to test, you know, your conviction and how willing you are to stick by your argument. And, you know, you don't have to be right. With a lot of these interview questions, there is no right answer, and so I think it's much better if you say, you know, I appreciate that point of view, but in my personal opinion, I'm going along this line of argument, and that's why I'm saying that this patient should get the organ. Something like that. You know, try not to crumble under the pressure, because it is very tempting to say, you know what, you are right, I'm wrong, I know nothing. But I think it's much better if you just stick to your guns, just try and stick by your answer. The last thing I think you should try and avoid doing in your interview is talking for an unnecessarily long time when it is not needed. So, you know, in your MMIs, for example, if that's the kind of interview you're having, you might have 7 minutes to answer 2 questions. And I think it can be really awkward at times when you're sat across someone and they're not giving you that much verbal feedback, because many of them won't, to know when to pause and to regain your thoughts and just stop. So you do not have to fill the entire time in your interview. Obviously, if they've got a certain amount of questions to get through, it's great if you can. Also, if you're being asked a question and it's something you're unfamiliar with, or you know, you need to think things through, just say, is it okay if I just take 30 seconds? Think it through. I think you come across as being much more mature and well thought out if you do it that way, rather than if you just kind of word vomit all your ideas into the open and it's all a bit disorganized and chaotic, which is what you tend to do when you're nervous. So just try and be mindful of that. Now let's talk about the 5 things I think you should do in your interview in order to boost your performance. The first one is to pay attention to your body language and dress appropriately. So, you know, try and maintain your confidence, sit with your shoulders back, maintain eye contact, don't fiddle with your hair, your sleeves. Just try and be really conscious of that, and that's something that will come with practice. It's something we almost do unconsciously when we're nervous, and it's best to avoid it. Likewise, make sure you're dressed in something that's smart, that you're not going to feel self-conscious in. Do some power poses if you want to, you know, whatever's going to get you through the interview. The next thing I've said you definitely should do is research about that specific uni. Even if you end up getting 4 interviews, I know it can be a bit stressful, but you need to do your research about the 4 different unis, their style of teaching, the kind of medical curriculum they operate on, and also research a little bit about the city, because they might say to you, you know, why have you chosen King's College London? Why haven't you chosen Imperial? That's in London as well. And so they will expect you to have that knowledge about their university. So you want to show them that you've really looked at their prospectus and you've weighed up your options. The next thing I've said you should definitely do is be honest. This can apply to so many different scenarios. So they might ask you something, you know, what do you think about this disease? Or what do you think about this hot topic in medicine? And, you know, as embarrassing and frustrating as it is when we do not know, just be honest. Just say to them, you know, I'm unfamiliar with this particular disease you're talking about. Do you mind elaborating on it a bit further? And then I can answer accordingly. Honesty is one of the best qualities you can have as a doctor. We operate on the principle of honesty throughout our entire practice. So the more you're demonstrating that to the examiner, the better you'll look. Also, you know, don't lie about anything you've seen, because they'll probably call you up on it. You know, you might be saying, I saw a cardiac surgery and it was amazing. And you never know, the guy sitting opposite you interviewing you might well be a cardiologist. I had a cardiologist in one of my interviews, so just be mindful. The next thing I've said you definitely should do is practice. Especially practice the things that you can almost guarantee will come up. Why medicine? Maybe a question on medical ethics. Maybe a question on hot topics in the NHS, or how we're dealing with coronavirus. That's probably going to be a major theme this year. Just make sure you're really familiar with the common questions. Also things like, what are your greatest strengths? What are your biggest weaknesses? Classic interview questions. You really don't want to be tripped up on the things you can prepare for. You want to be tripped up on the things you can't prepare for, and there will probably be a few of those as well. The last thing I've said you should definitely do, and that's something I've mentioned a bit earlier, is to reflect. Wherever possible, reflect. Reflect about yourself, reflect about your work experience, show that insight. This is something you can especially apply to questions like, you know, what's your biggest weakness? Be honest, don't say, you know, I'm too perfect, or don't say something like, you know, I'm too organized. You know, just be honest about it. So I think for me, I said I'm a bit of an overthinker, and I said sometimes it hinders my practice because I worry too much about, you know, the different outcomes and which one I should have picked. But then I said, you know, to rectify that, I make sure that whenever I'm not sure about my decision, I escalate it to a senior, or I reflect in my own time when I'm back home, away from work. Reflection is such an important quality as a doctor. It's something you will do so many times throughout medical school as well. You know, when you're in medical school, you're going to have a portfolio to be assessed on, and half the time you're reflecting about a patient you saw, a skill you did, a procedure you did. Being able to weigh up your performance and say what you've done well and what you haven't done so well in, is a really important quality and skill to have. So those are my top 5 things you should avoid and top 5 things you should do in your medical school interviews. I really hope this was valuable and you took some tips from this, and I really hope that all your interview preparation is going really well. I know it's a really tough year for it, and if there's anything we can do, please do let us know in the comments down below. Just a reminder to make sure you're subscribed to this channel. We would love to reach 1,000 subscribers soon. We're fast approaching it, which is so exciting, and I'm glad you guys are all really enjoying the content. But other than that, I will see you in our next video. Bye!